Welcome to the Professor Lending Institute, where we make sense of housing economics and the home buying process and a lot more. I'm Jordan Steffaniak, President of Professor Lending, licensed loan originator, and your home economic and lending professor. In today's episode, we're going to be covering the topic of the 50-year mortgage and housing affordability. How do we achieve that? So before we jump into the episode, remember, like the video if you enjoy the content, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything that we create here, and do share the show if you find it useful. Drop a comment below if you've got ideas or thoughts or differences of opinion. That's always fun. Now, if you don't live under a rock, you saw President Trump tweet out, or I guess not tweet out, Truth Social. What do you call a Truth Social post? Something about a 50-year mortgage. He compared himself to FDR in the 30-year mortgage. Forget the funniness of the political juxtaposition there and just focus on the 50-year mortgage. Puts this out there. There was a visceral reaction in the sphere, including myself, who says, hey, 50-year mortgage, that's bad news. Why would you do that? There's a lot of other options. That's a really bad one. But when I did the numbers a little bit more carefully, I thought, you know what? Actually, the 50-year mortgage isn't as bad. It's still a bad thing. And I'll walk through that and show you that. But it's not as bad. And then we can sort of walk through some potential solutions. But at the end of the day, it's good news that we have an administration that's actually caring about housing. The housing economy is a significant part of the United States economy, a significant part of all of us where we live. It's our shelter. We all need shelter. And so it's nice to see some solutions rather than just ethereal statements. They may be bad solutions, but I would prefer someone actually giving some ideas, putting some energy into this, because maybe that leads us to an actual solution that's good. So this is not a political piece, but it is a pro-housing piece. So let's go ahead and get into this. I'm going to show you guys on my screen here. This is just an Excel file that I created, so it's not pretty. It is what it is. So take it for what it's worth. Obviously, you can tell now it's not pretty. But what I've done here is I've taken the terms, 15 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. No one talked about a 40-year, but I'm showing it here for comparison. And then I put the rates here. So traditionally, if you know, mortgage rates are going to be a little bit lower for a lower term, less risk involved. It's usually going to be worse, probably, a rate comparison from the 15 to the 50-year. But we'll just keep it close for comparison here in this scenario, and we can show what it would look like if the rates were worse for a 50-year. But let's just assume this is the case here. So you've got the 15 through the 50-year. You've got your principal and interest payment only, not including anything on the housing or I guess the homeowners insurance and taxes. That's going to be the same across the board, so it doesn't really matter. And the rate, obviously, is just the standard interest rate. That's not including the APR. We can have a whole discussion on what APR is. It's irrelevant for this particular scenario and example. So this is just a discussion on what it looks like from a 30-year to a 50-year on the principal and interest exclusively. So all the necessary caveats here. This is the total amount of interest you're going to pay if you had that loan for the entire 30-year or 40-year or 50-year period. You've got a $3,300 a month on that 15-year. You drop it to 30 years, it drops to $2,400. That is a significant decrease in savings in your monthly payment, allowing you to have more buying power. But when we go to 40 and 50-year, you see a nominal decrease. The 30 to 50-year difference is $132 a month. That's not a lot. That's not the $1,000 you're saving from the 15 to 30. And that 40 to 50-year difference is literally almost only $12 a month. So why would you jump straight to the 50 instead of the 40? I have no idea, but we'll leave that there for you to decide. You've got here the total amount of interest. Again, that is for the full term. So that is a huge amount, 1.4 million versus 886,000. However, that's not always going to be the case for most people. Most people are going to live in a house. They're going to go sell it, buy a new house, get a new mortgage. They're going to refinance to a lower rate. So most people are in that 5 to 7 year range are in that actual loan. So I just basically said, okay, what's it look like year 3, year 5, year 7, year 10 on the total interest? And again, I'm using a purchase price of $425,000 and a loan amount of $400,000. And I'm going to use an appreciation of your home of 3% a year, but it doesn't matter what we do. If we put 5% appreciation, it's not going to change the difference between the 50 and the 30-year in any way. And so you can see here, that's the home appreciation over that period of time. And you can see what I've done here is the total principal paid, the total interest paid, the total equity that you've pulled out of the house after 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. And here is what you're going to see. So you're going to see this is the monthly savings if you went to the 50 versus the 30-year over time. So after 3 years, you'll have saved almost $5,000 in your monthly payment. After 5 years, almost 8,000, etc. But you'll have paid less in principal. You can see here 15,000 versus 3,000 paid in principal, because most of your payment's going to interest at this point. So that is a $12,000 difference. So that while you save $5,000, you paid an additional $12,000 toward interest. Okay. So at the end of the day, you actually paid an additional $7,000 after 3 years of being in the 50-year loan. That's just the facts of the matter, because you lost out on some of the equity growth that you've built. After 5 years, you've lost 13,000. After 7 years, you've lost 20,000. After 10 years, you've lost 33,000. Now, the real big kickers when this gets huge and balloons is after 30 years. Naturally, you're no longer paying a mortgage on a 30-year term after year 31, 32. You would on a 50-year. That's where it really gets big. So theoretically, I mean, that's not a huge difference. And then what you can also add in is the tax savings that you'd get if you pay more in interest and you itemize your deductions on your taxes, so you're being able to write off some of that additional interest. Basically all I'm doing here is a 0.24. If let's assume you're in the 24% tax bracket, giving you some of that additional savings, $560 a year, etc. And that's going to break it out here to that's how much. So the total savings, 5,000, 10,000, 15, 25,000. So you are losing money on a 50-year, but it's not as substantial as I had anticipated in my mind when I'm looking just at the total difference. However, it's just $132 you're saving a month. You could stay on a 30-year, drop interest rates from 6.25 to 5.75, and your payment is now identical almost to that 50-year. So if you're worried about housing affordability, which seems to be the reason to go to the 50-year is affordability, how about we have some economic policies that help us to get to that 5.75% rate? And the truth is, it's probably not going to be 6.75. It's probably going to be 7 or 7.25 for that. If it was 7.25, if it was a whole point higher, you're paying more to that 50-year. Now, for at 7%, you're only saving $50 a month. So the 50-year doesn't really solve any issues. It doesn't actually solve any problems. It's not as bad as you would think initially when you see that huge interest number, because most people aren't in the loan that long, but it's not actually really alleviating the issue that we have with affordability. What's going to help alleviate that affordability are two things. One, mortgage interest rates going down, or two, wage growth going up. So if you're familiar with any of this data, so I'll share with you guys some additional data here, share my screen. Let's share this window. Boom. So you can see here, we've got, this is inflation over time. It's been, that 2% is the goal, Fed's goal, obviously went crazy the last couple of years, come back down to 3%. What we really need is inflation to stay low, to stay moderately at that 2%, and that wage growth here, you can see here it dipped a bunch in the early 2010s and has been up in that 4% range. When wage growth can outpace inflation and can outpace sort of the appreciation of your house, interest rates don't matter as much anymore, because you now make more money. And now you can afford a larger monthly payment, even if interest rates don't go down. This takes time. So this is not a quick fix to a housing solution. So here you can see if this blue line would be wages, as long as that's outpacing inflation, that black line, that's a good thing, right? So how do we solve housing affordability? Interest rates go down. How do interest rates go down? You control inflation. Low inflation, we've had not great inflation reports, so that's keeping the interest rates a little bit higher. Now, the Fed funds rate doesn't exactly correlate to mortgage rates. There's a lot of different factors at play. I'm not going to sort of explain all of them here, but just for the sake of argument, assume if interest rates go down, that's going to correspond to lower inflation typically. So let's do economic policies that help lower inflation. Now, unfortunately, some economic policies that help lower inflation is higher rates. So it's kind of like this catch-22. How do we solve this? Well, one way you could solve it would be increase inventory. If there's more houses to buy, there's less reason to pay higher prices. Now, the problem with this is that, that would in theory work, but one, you've got to convince builders to build more houses. How are you going to do that? Housing market's already extremely subsidized. And the other worry here is that the way the U.S. housing economy works It's really subsidized home ownership, and it's really incentivized homes to be the sort of like main source of net worth for a lot of people. That's where their equity is, that's where their net worth is, that's where their retirement fundamentally is. And the problem here is that obviously the federal government has a vested interest in protecting that equity and that asset that you have. And so any sort of policy that would then drop home prices drastically would be bad on a large macroeconomic scale. So that's not going to happen. So how do we do this? If mortgage interest rates went down significantly, that would allow price controls to run, like the price appreciation to run out of control again, like we saw during COVID when interest rates were rock bottom. Prices go out of control because people have this great, huge buying power all of a sudden. The real solution to affordability is just time, and that's not a good answer. You're not going to want to hear that, but it's time. Higher interest rates over time will allow wage growth to catch up to be able to afford the current home prices. I know people don't like that answer. Especially if you're on the side, if you already own a home, it's not as bad. If it's that first time home buyer trying to get into the market, when you're like, I don't make enough to buy anything over a $300,000 house, and they don't come on the market, they don't exist. How do I get into the market? Well, you're going to have to start small and grow your wages over time. That's the real unfortunate solution to the housing affordability problem. Now, there are different pieces that can incentivize these different aspects. Obviously, I think it would be helpful if we could lower mortgage rates a little bit. I think if we went down to the low fives, mid fives, I imagine that that's going to churn the housing market more. You're going to see more affordability, more buying power. Naturally, if we went to 5.75 instead of the 6.25, that drops that monthly payment to where it's equal to the 50-year. So there are ways to help affordability without allowing home appreciation to run out of control, because then we're still stuck in that affordability issue. But the real solution is wage growth over time, controlling home prices, seeing wage growth over time, controlling that inflation. We will see that. Now, the other solution that we've seen the administration bring out was assumable mortgages and portable mortgages. Assumable mortgages, you've seen those. Those exist. VAs do that somewhat frequently, FHAs. The basic idea of this is that if you buy a house, you can assume the previous owner's mortgage. The reason this works is because mortgages are underwritten to the standards of that particular house. So if you're buying that particular house, you don't have to re-underwrite the credit standards of the house itself. Now you are going to have to bring a large sum of money to get into that house. You're going to have a gap. Say the loan's $200,000 left on it. The house is being sold for $350,000. Well, you've got a huge gap. You've got to come with $150,000 to be able to buy that house. That's not solving an affordability problem. That's a major liquidity issue. So that's not going to help affordability, even if it's a low interest rate, because you still have this huge gap that you have to bring as a down payment. Portable mortgages, you might think like, hey, I can take my 3% with me to the next house. Cool, that could help me. But again, you're going to have this huge equity gap. If you're upsizing to a new house, unless you're moving to an identical house, an identical value, you're going to have an issue with a gap in equity that you have to bring to this house that you don't have. There's also all these other problems with just the way mortgages work. They're underwritten to the standards of one particular house, not this new house you're buying. So you're going to have to re-underwrite the entire thing. You're going to have to redo an appraisal. It's going to be a mess, and no lender's going to say, yes, I want to do that. So does that make sense? So I'm glad there are ideas being floated out there. These don't ultimately hold the solution, though, I think, for the housing affordability issue, which is going to be wage growth, lower inflation, and hopefully some reduction in that mortgage interest rate will help the overall housing economy. 50-year mortgage is not going to solve the issue. It doesn't make enough savings, and you're losing equity long-term over it. So it's not really a good solution, but we've got to have other solutions. Housing market in the U.S. is already incredibly subsidized. It is the envy of the world. No one has the 30-year fixed mortgage. No one else has. They look at our housing market and they think, amazing. And it is. It's amazing. We've got the tools in place already to solve affordability. It just takes time. You have to wait years. And that's not a good answer for people who are caught in that period of, I was of home buying age almost, and now I'm not because I no longer can afford this. Now I'm going to help that number from NAR that went first time home buyer median age is 40 continue to climb. There are ways to go about this, though. There are down payment assistance programs. There are all sorts of different programs that can help you get into a house and begin to build equity so that the affordability issue is no longer a serious problem for you. So if that's you and you feel like you're locked out, let me know. Give me a shout. Direct message me on social media. Shoot me an email. Chat us on our website, professorlending.com. Drop a comment here. We'd be happy to help you and give you the solutions and give you the sort of education that's necessary so you can understand what is my plan. How can I get from A to B to make sure I can afford this house, qualify for this house, and then own this house and start to begin building equity, generational wealth, and being able to provide stability for my family. A lot of people feel like that's not something in the cards for them, but it can be. There are solutions. There are all sorts of lending opportunities that can get you in the game and allow you to be able to have access to this so-called American dream. So let me know if you have questions on that. What do you think about the 50-year mortgage? Good idea, bad idea? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear from you guys.